Well, wonderful. We have a full house tonight for this great conversation with Victor Friedman. I am going to unpin my video so that I can start. Zdravo to everyone. I just had my Macedonsko kafe and ready to kickstart this virtual conversation on the timely topic of Macedonian language's significance, Bulgaria's ideology, and question of Western Balkans EU accession with someone I have enormous respect for and consider a friend, Victor Friedman. Zdravo, Victor, kako si?
Zdravo, Meto, dobar sam. Hvala. Spolajti.
Odlično, odlično. Hvala mnogo, Victor. Večerva, well, we're going to actually, Victor and I typically speak in Macedonian, believe it or not. However, for the purposes of our diverse audience on the Zoom call, as well as those watching live on Facebook, the conversation will continue in English, but you may hear some Macedonski chatpat, meaning sometimes. If you have any questions for Victor, please type them in the chat or Facebook comments area, and we'll aim to get as many as we can during this conversation. Among Macedonians, Victor is a household name. His professional career as an educator is prolific. His lifelong love of the Macedonian language, literature, dialects, and history, being the world's foremost scholar on the Macedonian language, has earned him numerous awards and recognitions, including full membership in the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts and 3 gold medals from St. Cyril and Methodi University in Skopje, among many others. We at UMD honored Victor in June 2011 with our UMD Macedonia Friendship Award at our 3rd global conference in Washington, D.C. And in November 2015, he became the first non-Macedonian to receive UMD's Lifetime Achievement Award at our gala in Chicago. Now, enough of me talking. Victor, we want to hear from you now. Why the love of Macedonian language, and tell us about the significance of the Macedonian language in your view.
Sure. So first of all, you have to understand that in college, I was a Russian major because my father's side of the family came from Russia. So I had an interest in Slavic languages, but at the same time, I was interested in Macedonian folklore because I was a folk dancer in the 60s. So I loved Macedonian dances. And in 1969, I had a chance to go to Russia to study Russian in Russia under Brezhnev. And all I could think was, thank God my grandparents left this wretched place. So I decided I had to do something else. And South Slavic seemed like the natural way to go. I started with Serbo-Croatian, and then I studied Bulgarian, Old Church Slavonic. And then one day in the elevator of the Slavic department at the University of Chicago, where I was a graduate student in 1971, one of my professors, Zbigniew Golub, said to me, Mr. Friedman, would you like to go to Macedonia this summer? And I said, sure. It was the 4th International Seminar for Macedonian Language, Literature, and Culture. And the Slavic department came up with $100, which got me a round-trip student fare ticket to Rome. And then my parents gave me another $100, which got me from Rome to Belgrade. And then I paid my way from Belgrade down to Bitola, and then a bus over to Ohrid. And I had such a good time. It was such a wonderful experience. I mean, especially Yugoslavia in 1971, I mean, those were the golden years. You could get your visa at the door. All the Roms still wore shalvari, even in Belgrade. You know, Macedonians, Roms, Turks, Albanians, Vlasi, all the different nationalities, all the languages. I love all the languages. So, plus the seminar itself was so much fun. There were cocktails almost every night. There was, you know, live music. There was dancing. And I told the head of the Secretariat for Foreign Relations, who came to one of the cocktails, I said, I want to write my dissertation in Macedonian. And he said to me, come to Skopje for a few days. And I had time, I was young. And so I take a bus from Ohrid to Skopje, and I'm supposed to call him on the telephone. Well, telephone Skopje in 1971, excuse me, they don't work at all. So I go into the bus station, what am I gonna do? So I go up to the shelter and I explain to the woman, and my Macedonian wasn't that good at the time, but it was, you know, chatpat as we say. And she actually invited me into the shelter, sat me down on a little stool where her friends would come and sit with her for coffee, and called the official to come and pick me up, right? Now that's the kind of hospitality that you won't see hardly anywhere in the world, certainly not Russia, and not even America, really, let's be honest, you know. So that was those were my first impressions of Macedonia, and how could I not like it, right? How could I not have a good time? And I did write my dissertation on the Macedonian verb, and it was only later that I discovered that, you know, the Greeks were this and the Bulgarians were that, and that, you know, I had gotten myself into a situation where I was am constantly being badgered about things that my colleagues who do Bulgarian and Greek don't get badgered about.
Wow. Well, definitely the standards regarding anybody that works on Macedonian issues, you know, and particularly the opposition that people face like you, particularly in academia. But I want to, you know, really thank you on behalf of UMD for being such a strong advocate for equal human rights of Macedonians, particularly, you know, one of our most basic human rights, and that is to speak our own Macedonian language. And I know, Victor, you prepared a few kind of slides and maps, and I really want to get into the topic at hand. And you know, the Bulgarian government's ever increasing nationalistic rhetoric, disputing the existence of the Macedonian language and their denial of ethnic Macedonians even, you know, existing. And their belief is that Macedonians are Western Bulgarians and we speak a Bulgarian dialect. And as you know, and you've been in the media quite a bit in Macedonia about this, is that recently the Bulgarian Academy for Sciences published a pamphlet stating just this, right? And have started to circulate it widely, especially in European circles. Bulgaria has threatened to block Macedonia's European Union membership over these very issues. So what's behind Bulgaria's ideology?
Well, there's several things here. I would say, to the question, what's behind the ideology, it's that the Bulgarians can't get over the fact that Macedonians aren't Bulgarians and don't think they're Bulgarians and don't want to be Bulgarians. And it's every Bulgarian government has made use of this expansionist, let's call it, ideology, regardless of whether they were fascist or communist or democratic. You know, it's like, it's a way for the Bulgarian thieves who are politicians to distract the Bulgarian people from what's really important. Bulgarian people are, well, one problem is that Bulgarian people in school learn this ideology because it's what they're taught. The politicians support it. During the communist period, the Russians would rein in the Bulgarians whenever they wanted to have good relations with Yugoslavia, and then they would let the Bulgarians go and be obnoxious whenever they wanted to give trouble to Yugoslavia. And what they're doing now, what the Russians are doing now, I think, is letting the Bulgarians go, or encouraging the Bulgarians, in order to prevent EU expansion. This is what the Bulgarians are doing, basically.
Well, just to add on that, Victor, I think there was a report, I believe, in 1971 that was by the CIA that labeled Bulgaria's problem the Macedonian syndrome. And we've noticed this over and over again throughout the years. And so I don't understand it. I don't understand how the EU and NATO, frankly, allow, what I call a sort of a cultural genocide upon Macedonians and their very identity, by saying, okay, we're in order for us to support you, and they know Macedonia leaders want Macedonia in NATO and EU, and in terms of economic development and all that stuff that I guess EU and NATO membership would bring, other folks can argue otherwise. However, that is the basis of this very discussion. And now Bulgaria has the upper hand, and they're using it and they're taking advantage.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the moment they think they do in terms of the EU. A lot of this has to do with what's called political will, right? So one of the reasons why the name issue dragged on for 30 years was because nobody gave a shit. Sorry, I was being a little too emotional, let's say, okay? I do get angry though, I do get angry. You know, I've been doing this for 50 years and, do gusha mi sta. But let's be honest, Greece has 10 million citizens and a very important NATO ally, and Macedonia has 2 million and it's a tiny little landlocked country. So the Greeks can push around like they want to a large extent. Plus, there's the 19th century mythology pushed by both the English and the Germans, which supported their colonial expansion, that Greece is the so-called cradle of democracy, of which the English and the Germans were then the superior inheritors, which made the Greeks feel inferior. So the Greeks and the Bulgarians both have inferiority complexes vis-a-vis the West Europeans, which the West Europeans very successfully imposed on them, right? So why should the West Europeans do anything for the Macedonians when it is the inferiority complex that they imposed on the Greeks and the Bulgarians that helps them, the West Europeans, feel superior, if you see what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think this is why we're having this conversation, is we need folks like you, particularly somebody who has been involved for such a long time, for 50 plus years, advocate for these very basic human rights of being allowed to call your language Macedonian. It is an official language. And I would love for you to perhaps now, why don't we bring up these slides and you can start your official presentation. And I know that we're gonna get into many questions. I have many questions. The audience has many questions that were submitted before. I'm already seeing our chat has, populated in questions. So hopefully we could get to everything in an hour. If we go over, hopefully there won't be an issue. But please, Victor, go right ahead and share your slides.
Okay.
And get into the presentation.
So let me do this. Share screen. Okay, come on. There you go. Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to begin with is a project that began in the 1960s, 65 or so, called the Common Slavic Linguistic Atlas. And the point of this atlas was to map all the significant phonological, morphological features of all the Slavic languages. It was agreed upon at the Fourth International Congress of Slavists in 1956 in Moscow. It took them until 65 to get started, and then it took another almost 20 years to gather the data because they had to meet and they had to decide, okay, what's the questionnaire going to look like? What is the data going to be that we collect with regard to developments of sounds, with the words, terms, all kinds. It's very complicated, but I'm just going to give you a small presentation here so you can get an idea. So this is the page from one of the atlases that was published. The atlases were published in different Slavic countries under the guidance of different different national committees. Now, back in the 60s, the national committees were the nation states of Eastern Europe and Russia. And there were also committees responsible for Slavic dialects outside of Slavic nation states. So Sorbian in Germany and Slovenian in Italy and Bulgarian in Turkey and both Bulgarian and Macedonian in Greece and so on, Slovenian in Austria and Hungary. So what you see here is a map of the word for lips. I know it's not easy to read and I can send it to anybody who wants, but let me go down here. So this is the map of, this map was produced in 2009. They started publishing volumes in 1988 and they're coming out bit by bit because this is very complicated stuff to do. And each of these symbols coordinates with a reconstructed or a base form up here. And I'll show you something easier to read in just a minute. So one of the interesting points of this map, so here you have to know, in 1982, the Bulgarian delegation led by Ivan Kochev, who is descended from people who are from Struga, declared that they would not participate in the project unless all the Macedonian points were given to Bulgaria. The rest of the national committees said no. So Bulgaria withdrew from the project and all the early maps have a blank for all the points where Bulgaria participated. So what happened in 2005, Bulgaria decided to rejoin the project. And I do not know, it would be interesting to find out exactly what motivated it. The person who led the Bulgarian delegation, the head of the Institute za Bulgarski Jezik, the Institute of Bulgarian Language, was a psycholinguist who just, he was okay, he didn't care. It was 2 years before Bulgaria's accession to the EU. And it may be that part of Bulgaria's conditions for accession to the EU were resolving the problem with Macedonia. I suspect that that had something to do with it. Anyway, the point is, Bulgaria could not re-enter the project unless there was unanimous agreement of the national committees, which at this point included the various new nations. So Czechia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, all the, and Macedonia, of course. Each of these republics had had their own Academy of Sciences prior in the 60s, but now these had become national committees. So it was really down to whether the Macedonians would let the Bulgarians back into the project. And the head of the Macedonian committee then, as now, is a scholar named Marian Markovic, who met with Rajnov. Actually, the two of them went outside to talk. And Marian said to Rajnov, look, we have common interests. They're just waiting for us to fight. Let's not fight. Just come back in and, behave. And Rajnov said, "Takate sakam." That's good for you. Bulgaria came back in. They had wonderful cooperation. Manu, the Bulgaria with Ban. That lasted till 2011. 2011, Rajnov retires. A new person takes over the institute. She's a computer linguist, so she shouldn't care. But she let Anna Kocheva, who is Ivan Kochev's daughter, take over dialectology. And that's when the trouble began. So the Bulgarians issued an atlas in 2016 in which they included all of Macedonia and half of Serbia, Eastern Serbia. They're totally wacko. So comes the Prespa agreement. The Greeks acknowledge that Macedonian is a language. even if they don't recognize the Macedonian minority in Greece, still. And that's when people started worrying about what the Bulgarians would do. So Manu issued a povelba, a declaration about the Macedonian language. And that got the Bulgarians started. The Bulgarians had already started, but this povelba, this declaration, made them go even further. So now I want to go a little more back to the atlas. So this is the map. This is an example of, for over 800 different Slavic-speaking points in Europe, for every single point we have the word for lips. And not just this, but imagine just thousands and thousands of data points. And then this is the example of the settled points. And here, so here, see that where I've got my little hand here, these are points that are in Macedonia. This is a point in Albania where it's given first in Macedonian and then in Albania. These are points in Greece where it's given first in Macedonian and then in Greek. And they do this not just for Macedonian, for every language where the nation state language is not a Slavic language. So in Hungary, they'll give it first in Serbian or Croatian or whatever, and then in Hungarian, and so on and so forth. So, and as you can see, a lot of data points. Now this is the map that was from the Macedonian Academy of Arts and Sciences in cooperation with the Institute for Macedonian Language, just last month published an atlas of selected lexical items, words, from the Ola Atlas. And as you can see, it's much easier to read. This is the same map. This is lips, only it has only the Macedonian parts on it. And it gives it here in Russian, in former Serbo-Croatian, and in Polish. So that's, from the three branches of Slavic, which are East and another South, the western part of South, and West Slavic. And here's the standard Macedonian, and then you can see all over Macedonian speech territory from the atlas. So the atlas, the Common Slavic Atlas, doesn't include Pirinska Macedonia. That was something that they had decided on when they did it their way. But it's really interesting because you can see down here we have Buzi, right? Over here we have Dudaci. Over here we have Rilo, which is from a different Slavic root. Buzi is Albanian, Dudaci is Turkish. It's very, very interesting, and lots of data. So,
Victor, while
yes.
we're on this map topic and the dialects, actually two questions were from the audience regarding dialects, and I'm wondering whether we could probably answer them during this time. UMD Advisory Council, Jim Public from Maryland, asked if my Egeiska grandparents spoke like this, Kaisi, Doish, Dayaish, Gra. Does that make them the equivalent of Macedonian hillbillies?
Right, and so here we have to, I have to give a little lecture here about sociolinguistics. So every dialect is as good as every other dialect. But different dialects have different social values. Linguistically, they're all the same, they're all equal, okay? So here's an example that I like to use. I use this with my classes in days gone by. In American English, the diphthong I in some dialects monophthongizes to A, okay? So I becomes A. This is very typical of the Southeastern American English dialects, where the pronoun I becomes A, as in I'm gonna go, okay? Now, in France, the Southern dialects preserve the diphthong I, just like in Northern English, and the Northern dialects monophthongize it to E. So, j'ai originally becomes j'ai, I have, okay, in French, okay? But in France, the northern dialect is prestigious and the southern dialect is not prestigious. Whereas in America, again, the northern dialect is more prestigious than the southern dialect. But in America, it's the non-monophthongization. And in France, it's the monophthongization, right? So speakers from geographic areas are involved in social evaluation just because that's the way human beings are. I'll give you another really good example. There is a village in Azerbaijan called Khinalug. And this village speaks a special language called Khinalug. It's not spoken in any other village in the world, and it's related to the languages in Dagestan, not to Turkish. And in this village, there are two dialects, Upper Khinalug and Lower Khinalug, depending on which side of the mountain you live on, all right? And people value dialect, people create value within their dialects, right? So Egejski Makedonski. When you're an Egeец and you speak Egejski, that's your home dialect. That's how you talk. So, you know, Andrew Rossos, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, when he wants to be down home, speaks Egejski with me and not Standardni. And Christina Kramer had a beautiful analogy because she taught generations of what they call heritage speakers, Macedonians. So these are especially children of Egejci, right? Who would come in, and the way I think she came up with a beautiful explanation. She said, the standard language is like your Sunday best. It's what you wear to church. It's what you wear when you want to, you know, wear your best clothing, whatever. It's standard languages do have a function in the same way that a suit and tie has a function. My bow tie has a function, right? But your dialect is every bit as good as the clothes you wear every day. Does that help?
Yeah, no, definitely. And you know, similar to, you know, my grandmother saying Spolaiti as opposed to Fala.
Yeah, I say Spolaiti all the time because when I say Fala to a Egejci, they sort of look at me like that. And anyway, I like the expression. I think it's a lovely expression.
It's interesting because I brought this up with Christina Kramer a few years ago, actually, and I said Fala, and then I said, oh, sorry, I should say Blagodaram. And she goes, why? And I said, because Fala is Srpski, it's a Serbian word. And she goes, no, Fala is Macedonian, Hvala is Serbian. And so I got corrected, you know, by Christina Kramer. And I think there's these common, you know, misunderstandings among a lot of people. And I think this is, I'm really glad you're bringing up this dialect, you know, aspect. And one of our UMD Macedonian companion, George Shapkato from Illinois, you know, he brought up this, obviously the discussion about Macedonian language being a branch of Bulgarian, and his family comes from Gevgelia on the Varda River near the modern day border with Greece. And he says his family pronounces words with emphasis on syllables differently than how those same words are pronounced by speakers native to Western Macedonia. He asks, is our dialect Bulgarian, and where do you draw the line?
Right. And actually, that's a fascinating question because the accentology, that is where you put the stress on words, is extremely salient to speakers, right? If somebody says umbrella instead of umbrella, you notice it, right? So at the same time, it is unbelievably complex. I don't have a map here to show you, but one of the interesting things about the Western Macedonian dialects on which the standard is based is that they have a fixed antepenultimate stress. It's 2 syllables back. So for example, Vodenica, Vodenicite. I thought it was Vodenica, Vodenicite. Vodenichar, that's the word I wanted. Vodenichar, Vodenichari, Vodenicharite. Okay, that's how people talk in Western Macedonia, and it's very distinctive, right?
Yes.
Now, when you go west of the Vardar, or the Crna, depending, because it's a Vardar-Crna line. So Mariovo has its own accent pattern between the Crna and the Vardar, Tikveshko, and then east of that, it's distinctive again, and north in southern Serbian, Torlački govori, the Torlak dialects, they all have a wide variety of accent patterns, and my friends Joe Shallard and Ronnie Alexander have spent their lives studying the complexities of South Slavic accenttual patterns. So did Pavljević. I mean, Serbo-Croatian is not some monolithic accent pattern. It's wild. It's crazy. It's so complicated. So the fact that in Gevgelija, the dialect, the places of stress is different from in the West, it's like, yeah, sure. It's different from further east. It's different from further north. It's different from further. The accent placement is just amazing. So,
well, when I spoke to a friend from the first time I met somebody from Strumica, they said "Tova je dobro," and I said, "Što znači?" What does that mean? I was much younger, and then I remember visiting. Actually, my baba, my grandmother, has a sister that lived in Gevgelija in one of the villages there, and I needed a translator when I was much younger. Now it's a lot easier because I've more or less perfected as much as I can the language, and even though I'm still learning, but I needed a translator when I was like 12 because I didn't understand anything they were saying.
Well, that's partially also because of not only the place of stress, but the vowel reduction. Because in that part of Macedonian, A goes to E goes to E, and O goes to U, right? And they drop syllables here. So for example, Common Slavic mucha, fly, becomes in Western Macedonian muva, right? But in that area becomes mua, which becomes mu, but retains its feminine gender. So mu is fly and muta is the fly, right? And this is difficult. I mean, these are things, once you know the linguistics, it's simple. But look, I live in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. I'm from the South Side. But people who moved here from the South back in the 1940s during World War II still speak a Southeastern American dialect. And I remember very clearly once I was waiting outside for something or other, and a young man approached me and he asked me, "Where the bar am at?" And I didn't understand what he said. And then I realized that he was asking me where there was a bathroom, and I could show him that there was there and so on. But English dialects, England, go to England, native speaker of English, go to England, go up north and try and understand what they're saying. Or Scotland for that matter. This, all languages, if a language is sufficiently spread out, then you're going to get dialects that are close enough as long as you're used to it, but not if you're not.
So there was some criticism, I believe, in regards to this recent dialects book, and I wanted to ask you about that, is because it seems like there's a lot of focus on dialects in Mala Prespa, Egejska, Aegean Macedonian, Macedonia, but it doesn't seem like there's much in Bulgaria. And so could you shed some light on that, and maybe like the differentiation between the dialect of Blagoevgrad and that of Solun and that of, Ohrid?
Well, okay, so Mala Prespa is down here. And the dialects are actually, they work, it's sort of like they go around the lake. Some of them might go with the Kosturski, and then you have Golobrdo on this side, and you've got Gora up here. So the national boundaries, when it comes to Western Macedonian, cut through the dialect areas. And what the Bulgarians have done is they've sent their diplomats to Albania and to Kosovo, and they give young people scholarships to go study in Bulgaria and to become Bulgarian. They're basically paying people to declare themselves Bulgarian. And some people take the money and some people don't. You know, and then there's in Goloburdo and Gora, there's another problem. And this is something that I think should be mentioned. And that is when all modern national identities have their origin in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. Bulgarian, Greek, Albanian, Macedonian, Serbian, call it what you want. Before the end of the 18th century, everybody identified by religion. They didn't care what language you spoke, as long as you were the same religion. And that's one of the reasons why the languages have the interesting features that they do. But my point is, the Albanians succeeded in creating a national movement that eschewed religion. So in Albanian, there's this famous poem from the 1880s, Mos shikoj as kishash jamia, feja shqiptarita shqiptaria. Don't look at the church or the mosque. The faith of the Albanian is Albanianness. And Macedonians, like Bulgarians and Serbs, failed to rise above religion. Serbian, Bulgarian, and Macedonian have all become associated with orthodoxy, as has Greek. So the Greeks expelled all the Muslim Greek speakers. In the case of Serbia, the Muslims became Bosnians, the Catholics became Croats. In Bulgaria, the Muslims became Pomaks. In Macedonia, they became Torbesh or Muslimani. In Eastern Macedonia, they used to be called Pomaks, actually. But so this is still a problem to this day in Macedonia, that there's an identification of religion with language, whereas the Albanians have overcome that identification in a way that the Macedonians have failed to do.
You've definitely opened a lot of questions here, and we're getting some questions from the audience that I wanted to bring up because I think they complement what you're talking about at the moment. Mario Christovsky, one of our members out of Ohio, and he runs this Mario's History Talks, and recently the Bulgarian member of European Parliament, Andrei Kovachev, attacked UMD and Mario's History Talks for basically an anti-Bulgarian. However, you know, we're not anti-Bulgarian, we're anti-Bulgarian government policy. And so he asks, he says, common criticism from the Bulgarians is that Blaže Koloski artificially Serbanized our language in 1944. How much closer were Macedonian and Bulgarian or how much closer in parentheses were Macedonian and Bulgarian closer before that point? And per Misirkov's work, it looks to be more of a continuation of the work already done rather than any dramatic break.
Absolutely. The Serbianization accusation dates from 1948, when Tito broke with Stalin. Because once Tito broke with Stalin, Stalin let the Bulgarians make that claim. It is, I'll use a polite word and say nonsense. Not only, I mean, I'm not a native speaker Macedonian. I learned this stuff in school. I didn't start learning Macedonian until I was 21. When I picked up Za makedonski teravoti, I could read it. What's the problem here, right? This tells you that in 1903, and he was from Kailar, he was from Egeiska Macedonia, he was writing in a dialect that wasn't his native dialect. It's clear that by 1903, there was already an agreement that the Western Macedonian dialect area, which has the largest area in Macedonia, was going to be the basis of the standard language. I've read the manuscripts of Risto Krle's Lenche Kumanovce, which is now known as Begalka. No, that was Vasilievski, excuse me, Vasilievski. Risto Krle, Parite se Otepuachka, other. I've read manuscripts from the 1920s in Manu in connection with my dissertation, and they are amazingly close to what is now the standard. Lenche Kumanovce was not written in Kumanovo dialect. It was written in a language that was very close to what became the standard, because Vasil Ilyovsky already had a sense. People had a sense of this. And that play, by the way, in the 1920s was the only one that would ever sell out to Macedonian viewers, because most of the plays were in Serbian and nobody went. But that one, which was allowed as dialect literature, was extremely successful. So this claim that Koloski Syrianized the language is crap. I'm getting a little more frank. Let us say another thing here about orthography. Now, two things. First, Bulgarian vocabulary is borrowed from Russian. Bulgarian borrows its participles from Russian. Bulgarian can be described as a Russianized Church Slavonic. Right? The Bulgarian orthography is just a gross imitation of Russian. It's completely inconsistent. There are three different ways to write, the sound k, whereas Blaže, educated in Serbia by Alexander Belic and in Bulgaria by Alexander Theodorov Balan, as a linguist, decided on Vukovica, the Serbian Cyrillic alphabet, with modifications to suit Macedonian. There's a lot of controversy about a couple of decisions that were made, and, tough. The point is, Macedonian orthography fits the Macedonian language perfectly. There's a few morphophonemic rules, but they're easy to learn, whereas Bulgarian orthography is a mishmash, right? So the Bulgarians saying, oh, you're Serbianizing our language. They Russianize theirs.
Well, it's and I know that you have a few more points to make. However, the one question that came up is by a colleague, Biljana Belimaric-Wilsley, with the Macedonian Language e-learning center, macedonianlanguage.org, from North Carolina. And she says, if this kind of propaganda has been spewed for 100+ years, and we have made no progress on how emotional people are about this issue, what can we do, and what hope can we have that this situation will change in the future?
That's a tough question. That's kind of like saying, how do you fix racism in America?
Well, that's a totally another topic that we actually had last week with a mindset mastery mentor, Suzanne Hart, and actually talked about that and the differences between leadership and management. But please, Victor.
Oh no, all we can do is keep on pushing. That was the motto of the Student Woodlawn Area Project that I participated in back in the 60s when I was involved in the civil rights movement. We would go into neighborhoods and tutor children. And so all we can do as, people who care about Macedonian, whether we're Macedonians or not, is continue to insist on the necessary rights. I guess maybe this is the point where I can bring in the nice bit about today's good news.
Please.
Yeah, so the map that you see in front of you here is one that was published, as I said, by Manu just recently, and right after it came out, and it's based on the Common Slavic Linguistic Atlas that I showed you earlier, the one with all the tiny little symbols. So when this atlas came out, the president of the Bulgarian Academy of Science. I didn't say this yet, did I? No. Okay.
No.
No. Good. The president of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, with two others, wrote to the head of the Common Slavic Linguistic Atlas Project, who is a Russian academician, Tatiana Vendina, and on behalf of the entire academy declared that Macedonian is a dialect of Bulgarian. All the Macedonian points have to be assigned to us. Marian Markovic is not competent, and we demand that you assign these points to us. Otherwise, we will withdraw, and you will be sorry, because then your atlas will be incomplete. Marian sent a very measured response to all the heads of all the national committees saying, you know, this is the way we've been operating ever since 1965. And, you know, we insist on continuing. This is nauka, this is science, right? And just today, Marian received the letter, which he then distributed to the academicians, and it'll go online very soon, I'm sure. From the head of the entire project, saying we must not let politics interfere with science, and we're keeping everything the way it has been since 1965. Period. Right? She didn't say to the Bulgarians, you know, something rude, but she definitively refused their demands. And that's a real victory for us, you know, and for Manu and for Macedonia and for Macedonian on the international scale. And I'm very happy that it happened today.
Excellent. I mean, it couldn't be more timelier for this discussion. And, you know, I think that you've definitely given quite a bit of arguments. And I think that, you know, one of the questions that we got from one of our members, Alex Popovsky, out of Florida, he goes, how can one make a reasonable argument that Macedonian is an offshoot of Bulgarian when the two modern literary languages are not mutually intelligible, right? And if they were, why would there be translations from one language to another? I mean, isn't that one of the main arguments that we can make?
Okay, so here I have to say something about, you know, language differentiation. So Danish and Norwegian are mutually intelligible. And up until the middle of the 19th century, the official language of Norway was Danish. And in the 19th century, Norway became an independent country and codified its own language, Norwegian, which is different from Danish, right? And to this day, Scandinavian diplomats, Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes, and I know this from personal talking to them because I worked for UMPROFOR and stuff, they take pride in not using interpreters because they can understand each other. At the same time, each of them knows that the other's language is different. And they have training for the differences when necessary. So the point is that two languages can have a high degree of mutual intelligibility and still be recognized as separate languages by civilized nation states. Point one. Point two, for a non-native speaker of Bulgarian or Macedonian, the other language is unintelligible. So I have a dear friend and colleague who speaks fluent Bulgarian. Her specialty is Bulgarian. She wrote her dissertation on Bulgarian. And she expanded into other languages over time and went to the Ohrid seminar back 20 more years ago. And I happened to be at the seminar for the opening, and she came up to me and she said, Victor, this is a different language. I don't understand what they're saying, right? So, you know, yes, they are different languages, but yes, if you speak one of them natively, and you're a grown-up, not a kid, a grown-up, you can go to the other country and get along just fine. It's not a problem, right? So everybody knows what language they're speaking, but they can communicate. It's a phenomenon all of Spain and Italy. I was in Italy with a delegation for something, and we went out to a restaurant, and none of us spoke Italian, and one of our numbers spoke Spanish, and she had no problem communicating with everybody in the restaurant, speaking Spanish in Italy, because the languages are close enough, right? So it's not, close, distant. It's a matter of obvious recognition. Of course, they're different, but that doesn't mean you can't understand each other, if you see what I'm trying to say here.
Definitely, definitely. And again, this is, one, I think it's such an amazing conversation that we're having, and I'm being educated. Please go ahead, Victor.
I have another thought here. I wanted to share this with you. So this is something I've been using. So imagine that Norway was in the EU and Sweden and Finland were not in the EU, okay? And then imagine that Norway, on the basis of the fact that the ancestral language of the Scandinavians is called Old Norse, insisted that all Scandinavian languages be called Norwegian. And then imagine that not only did they insist that the Swedes call what they speak Norwegian, but then they went and told the Finns that their Swedish minority, which they have, had to also be educated in standard Norwegian. Now, replace Norway with Bulgaria, Sweden with Macedonia, and Finland with Albania, and you've got exactly what's going on right now.
Wow. Wow. I think, for those in the audience that are tackling these issues and bringing awareness, particularly with their local, state, federal, and other countries in their advocacy work, I think these are great arguments to bring up. And something that one of our young leaders from Generation M, Elena Sekulovska from Melbourne, Australia, brought up the fact that Bulgaria entered into 4 wars in a span of 3 decades in order to gain Macedonian territory, even siding with the Nazis in World War II. According to you, I guess, can you speak to this and why this sort of importance over ownership of Macedonian territory, history, culture, identity, and then maybe along those lines, if you could expand on the role of Russia throughout all of this.
Good point, Neto. So Bulgaria has been expansionist from the get-go, right? And their dream state of San Stefano, which didn't happen because England didn't like it. But one of the things about the Treaty of San Stefano was that Bulgaria would become a Russian protectorate for 9 years. That was one of the things that scared the Brits. The Russians have been referring to Bulgaria as Zadunayskaya Gubernia for over 100 years, the province beyond the Danube. So Bulgaria has always been an object of Russian expansion. The better to encircle the Black Sea and get to Istanbul. But Bulgaria's relationship with Russia has always been troubled. The Russians attempted to stage a coup, they were stopped, in a paper that will be coming out soon from, there's a book, Manu is publishing a book, Marian Markovic is the editor, defending the Macedonian language against the Bulgarians. And I make a point of how Bulgaria has been subservient to Russia when it wasn't allied with Nazi Germany, that is. So Todor Zhivkov, the dictator for decades, they used to call him Baitosho if they didn't think anyone was listening. So Baitosho went to Moscow and Brezhnev gave him a beautiful fur coat that reached to the floor. And Tosho returns to Bulgaria, and he's showing his wife the fur coat, but it doesn't reach to the floor anymore. It's much shorter, and he doesn't understand why. And his wife says, Tosho, you were on your knees when you were in Moscow. That's the kind of joke they used to tell. You know, as for the fascists, absolutely, the Bulgarians, I mean, look, we have to separate Bulgarian governments from Bulgarian people. Bulgarian people prevented the deportation of the Jews during World War II. The Archbishop of Plovdiv, who later became the Patriarch of the Bulgarian Church, Dimitar Peshev, who was a member of parliament, and a bunch of people, the Bulgarians had rounded up all the Jews and were ready to ship them off to Treblinka. The men between the ages of 20 and 40 had already been sent to internal labor camps. And the way they saved their own Jews was by destroying the Macedonian Jews and the Jews of Thrace. And the Germans paid the Bulgarians more than 7 million leva for the transportation of Macedonia's and Thrace's Jews to Bulgaria. And the Bulgarians didn't admit it until 1993. You know, they have blood on their hands, you know, but one of the big problems with Bulgaria is that they use, just like the Greek fascists use the Macedonian issue to distract people from the economic mess that they made of Greece, so too the Bulgarian right-wingers, fascists, whatever, distract people from the crimes that they're committing by pushing up this Macedonian nonsense, right? Well, I might add that in Macedonia, right-wingers also push nationalism to distract people from what they're doing. Huh? How about those accounts in Belize?
Well, you know, I mean, this is very similar to, you know, on the other side, when you have Prime Minister Edi Rama from Albania pushing the Tirana platform and pushing it down, virtually down the throats of Albanian leaders in Macedonia, and then they announcing this Tirana platform on Macedonian Orthodox Christmas and making sure that that is their policy. And we're seeing it again now, you know, with the recent calls by Dewey, but I don't want to really let me jump in here. All right, Dewey is as criminal as Vumero Dupamune. Okay, the two of them were in league destroying Macedonia. Vistinata za Macedonia from 2015 tells you everything you need to know about that party. You know, you can still go online and see the transcripts. Read that and you understand. Other Albanian parties, it's a different story. That's a whole complicated problem. Sure. Well, you know, another thing that, you know, and I think also because, and obviously I have to state that UMD is a fully nonpartisan, non-governmental organization, and so we don't want
I didn't have to say that though.
You know, get involved in too much of that. But obviously, you can argue that for the last 30 years, different political parties in Macedonia have been in bed with each other and have made serious, grave mistakes on the future of the country, whether that's national issues, environmental issues. Some may be better suited for certain things according to who believes whom. But going back into the topic here, and I think it's this, you know, the EU, and a lot of these problems have been, you know, started as a result of the fact that Bulgaria and Greece are blocking Macedonia's progress. Greece with NATO, very, very hard line.
Goes back to 93, right? When
exactly.
Greece blocked Macedonia into the EC, and then the business into NATO, and now this, and it's like, oy.
Well, you know as well as I do, EU made a huge mistake by declaring in '92 in Lisbon that they would never recognize a country with the word Macedonia and retracting it, you know, 2 weeks later. However, in my visits and UMD delegation visits to Brussels and meeting with European members of parliament, they have stated that yes, Greece is a huge problem. Bulgaria is probably worse of a problem because they are literally, I mean, you were bringing up before, not only the language, but now they're also requesting Macedonia whitewash Bulgaria's role, whether that's during World War II, or the Macedonian language, or people like Goce Delchev and other historical figures that fought for an independent, free, sovereign Macedonia. And one of our and you brought this up, but one of the people that submitted a question, Anthony Hoover from Melbourne, Australia, asks, why doesn't the EU put pressure on member states like Greece and Bulgaria to uphold the rights of ethnic minorities within their countries, and also basically put a stop to Bulgaria and Greece's stances on Macedonia in terms of its identity, language, and history, and all that?
I would say that here there's a real problem with EU political will. There's a problem in the EU with fascists like Orban and the destruction of the judiciary in Poland, the rise of right-wing nationalists all over Europe. Germany at least is ashamed of itself. And so, they outlaw Nazis and so on and so forth. But in Austria, they run around freely. They pretend it was Germany's fault and not theirs. So this is part of a larger, I would say this is part of a larger EU problem with how can the EU be an organization that supports genuine rule of law. Okay, and this is something that and let's face it, Brexit didn't help. At least this is my view, But
I think at the end of the day, I definitely think that there's a lot more dilemmas that have opened up over the course of the last 15 years. But the other thing is the EU as an instrument for checks and balances. The EU, very different from NATO, and I was listening to the NATO Secretary General the other day when he said that when somebody asked him whether the EU could build an army to be equal to NATO, and it's a very interesting question because the EU is now developing their own army. However, he responded that they can't be a match in the sense that NATO, 80% of NATO's budget comes from non-EU countries. And something that we've noticed as a problem, again, it's the, if I can use this wishy-washy approach of the EU throughout history, whether that is from 1903, Balkan Wars, World War I, World War II, Greek Civil War, independence struggle. We can debate this all night, and I think we're going to be here for another 2 hours if we open some of these questions. However, again, it comes back to if the EU is serious to let Macedonia and these countries in, then you can't have, well, we know Greece is frustrated with you, so we're going to open up this high-level accession dialogue process, which was virtually nothing. I mean, they were trying to pretend that they were interested. We have the situation in Turkey with the EU, and the longer these countries are kept out, the more that they're going to look to other means. And that's why I asked you the question of Russia's role in all of this, and what they're doing, because you argued about Bulgaria, but I can also argue the Russian influence within Greece. The amount of money that they funneled about this, and in the neo-Nazi movement. I mean, you've been attacked by neo-Nazi Golden Dawn when you were presenting on the Abecedar, which
it was about the first Macedonian Greek dictionary to be published in Greece. That was the presentation. Sorry. But that was
no. Thank you
and they broke in, yeah, and they
correction.
threatened us, and you know, they were going to bash my head, and I took the pictures, and you know, the thing is, okay, Greece and Turkey have serious problems, and Turkey is more afraid of Russia than Greece is because it shares a border. Well, it doesn't share. Well, it sort of shares a border insofar as there's the Black Sea, right? It's not a simple game, right? Greece plays with Russia as a fellow Orthodox. Turkey plays with Russia as a way of, you know, sticking a finger up NATO's nose. You know, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia all have possibilities of allying one way or another. I mean, it's a mess, frankly. And if the European Union diplomats can't get it together, then who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
Well, something that we've been very interested in at UMD is religious freedom issues and human rights issues. And back to that, you know, the minority rights. I mean, Bulgaria, most recently, about 2 weeks ago, the European Court of Human Rights, again, for the 14th time, gave a landmark decision that Bulgaria is violating the minority rights of Macedonians. It's about the people there are the ones that can define whether they are a minority or not. It's not up to Bulgaria or Greece. And what we're noticing is that while these decisions are landmark and historic for our people, there's no implementation. Bulgaria and Greece pay the fines to the associations, but never register them as organizations, don't let them function as organizations. And we all know about the religious freedom matters of Archimandrit Nicodim Tsarknas in Sopotsko in Aegean Macedonia in Greece, where he can't even get a building permit because the Greek Orthodox Church won't allow it.
Right, and they keep the church in Voden locked. The old church.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is I mean, Bulgaria and Greece are probably the two worst members of the EU when it comes to minority rights. I can't think of any other EU member that has quite such an abominable record.
It's funny you mention that, because there was a report by the European Council on Foreign Relations saying that Greece and Cyprus are the Trojan horses of Russia in terms of EU decisions. But I want to actually pull you back to another topic, and I apologize, we're going over a little bit. But proponents of the Prespa agreement argue that Prespa solidified the recognition of the Macedonian language, putting aside the name issue because it's obviously a very sensitive, and you know UMD's position is Republic of Macedonia, and we'll never use the word North or North Macedonian, which is becoming more and more prevalent in media and academia that we're noticing. However, you know, Athens, there was a Abet that published in 1925 that recognized the Macedonian ethnic minority. There was Greek prime ministers that used the terminology Macedonian language, the term in 50s and the 60s. And at the 1977 UN Conference on the Standardization of Geographical Names, Greece officially recognized the Macedonian language. So how do you believe that the Prespa agreement, you know, because the thing is, like, the Bulgarians are saying, well, or they're probably thinking, well, if the Macedonians can change their name to get into NATO, well, why don't they change their language to get into the EU? So don't you believe that it opened up a Pandora's box?
Well, yes and no. So first of all, let's be clear. The Republic of Macedonia is the northern part of geographic Macedonia. So calling the Republic of Macedonia the Republic of North Macedonia isn't quite as terrible as some of the other possibilities that were suggested. I agree that it's wrong. The whole Prespa agreement is a travesty of international law. But given that there are no international laws when you start dropping bombs, let's just take it and go. Second point, North Macedonian is not an acceptable formulation according to the Prespa agreement and according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You either use the formulation of North Macedonia or Macedonian. That's the form. The citizens of North Macedonia are known as Macedonian. The language of North Macedonia is Macedonian, not North Macedonian. So that's just a point for clarification. Then, as for opening a Pandora's box, I mean, on the one hand, yes, the fact that the international community has been willing to let Macedonia dangle over a precipice for the last 27 or 28 years and doesn't really care is disheartening. On the other hand, with this North Macedonia, even though, you know, it's very unjust, at least the accession to NATO gives something. As far as the Bulgarians taking it up and saying, okay, now it's our turn, you know, there's an old expression, if you shake hands with a Greek, count your fingers, you know, and then if you give them a finger, they'll take your hand. If you give them a hand, they'll take your arm. So we've given the Greeks the finger, as it were, but, you know, we can't let them take the arm. That's what I would say. I would say, you know, there has to be a genuine line. You know, the North Macedonia, I'm not pleased with it. Nobody's pleased with it. But in terms of strict geographic whatever, fine, let it go. Especially because Macedonian, as Macedonian, is still the adjective, not North Macedonian. People throw that in, but they're wrong. And you can write them angry letters and tell them so. Whereas what Bulgaria is trying to do, that's on a completely different level. And no, just no. There's no way, you know. Let Russia take, God forbid. But, well, you know, threaten the EU with Russia. That's what I would say.
I hate to predict what's going to happen in 10 years, but we'll probably have a conversation again in 10 years, and probably, unfortunately, they'll come up with another creative agreement as, you know, to get Macedonia into the EU, if the EU has a political will to do that. Nobody knows, right? Nobody can.
Wait, I have to tell you a joke. It was told to me by a Bulgarian colleague of mine. She said to me, Macedonia is never going to get into the EU. I said, why? She says, because anything Bulgaria joins falls apart and loses.
Oh, boy.
Oh, think about that for a minute.
Yes. However, you know, one of our representatives out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, who R.G. Bellio, who you've met, I believe, on numerous occasions, you know, he brought up the fact that the precedent set by the current government in terms of, you know, one, you could argue that there was a need to get the country in NATO. So what's the solution to get the country in NATO? So that's an argument, right? The other argument is the fact that Macedonians had to change their very constitution in order to get this to happen. And that is an infringement on international law. It's the right of self-determination. You know this, I know this, all of us know this. And so now we have these historical commissions being created as a result of Prespa, as a result of the friendship agreement with Bulgaria. That sorry, to be friends, you don't need agreements, you need actions. And if there's no actions, they say this expression, job it, having agreements, right?
Right.
And we've seen what's happened with Crimea, we've seen what's happened in numerous other instances, right? And so who is going to hold these countries accountable? And that's what's unfortunate, is that they have the upper hand, Macedonia and Macedonians do not. So the question is like, what can we do? Can we use the outlet of the UN? You know, they did, I mean, the UN does define cultural genocide, not just physical, but cultural, or sometimes what I like to call ethnocide, right?
I use the term ethnocide myself.
You know, so
ethnocide is what the Greeks committed.
Yes, yes. And so do you think that there could be a possibility for some kind of General Assembly resolution in support of Macedonian, I guess, identity, language, history, based on how they know?
It's worth a try, but I don't know that it will make any difference in terms of European politics, to be honest. It's worth a try. But, you know, looking at UN resolutions, some of them work, some of them don't. The ones that work are generally backed up by armed force, like 1244. Well,
if the Security Council does not support it, and you have 5 countries there, and it was unfortunate that out of the 5 countries, France was the only one that did not recognize Republic of Macedonia as the name. And obviously, you know, the frustration that we faced of working so hard to get 140 countries to recognize Macedonia and then going, you know, back. But I think we've digressed perhaps from the topic. A few things that have been brought up is, and I want to hopefully end on a positive note, Victor, regarding this, but few things. One is Simon Zdravevsky from Melbourne, Australia, wanted to know regarding there's this claim that there's no such evidence of the ancient Macedonian language. Do you know of, or have there been any studies between, I guess, correlation between the current Macedonian language and possible links to a language from ancient Macedonia?
Right. Okay. So this is a very, So we do have scattered words in ancient Macedonian, the language of Alexander, so to speak. They are individual words in glossaries, lexicons, proper names, this kind of thing. So there's a Macedonian name, Berenike. Berenike means the bringer of victory. Now the Nike is exactly ancient Greek, Nike, right? But the Beri, with a B, is not Greek, because the Greek would have been Perinike, ancient Greek, Perinike, which is now Ferinike, right? So it means that whatever kind of language ancient Macedonian was, and the Indo-European word for carry or bear, English bear is the same root, is ber with an aspiration. So the fact that Macedonian has Berinike and ancient Greek would have been Perinike, leads us to think that, and also ancient Macedonian, from the scraps that we have, we've only got lexical items, words. A third of them are clearly not Indo-European. They're from the people who were there before the Macedonians came, because the Macedonians probably spoke an Indo-European language. A third of their vocabulary is clearly Indo-European and not Greek, and a third is Greek. So what do we do? And by the way, 40% of ancient Greek vocabulary is not Greek. 40% of ancient Greek vocabulary was borrowed from the languages of the people they conquered when they invaded the Hellenic peninsula. Nobody disputes that. What people dispute is whether they were Anatolians or, you know, pre-Anatolian. It's not our problem. So ancient Macedonian then consists of these three layers: not Indo-European, Indo-European but not Greek, and Greek. So the question is ancient Macedonian an Indo-European language that together with Greek split off from the rest of Indo-European and then separated, or did it separate from Indo-European earlier so that it was separate from Greek from Hellenic, as we call it, from the get-go? Or some people want to say it was a Greek dialect. Well, the people who want to say it was a Greek dialect, the best evidence they have is a curse tablet that was found a few decades ago, but it dates from the 4th century. It dates from the period when Macedonians were giving up their language and speaking Greek. And it's in a dialect, a Doric dialect, a weird one. But it doesn't tell us anything about ancient Macedonian. And the Greeks who bring this up, it's just, you know, they don't understand. It's like, that's not ancient Macedonian. Ancient Macedonian was an Indo-European language. It was different from Greek. We don't know how closely related it was to Greek because we don't have a single sentence in this language. We don't know how the verbs ended. We don't know what the case forms were. All we have are these isolated lexical items. Anyway, now, Slavic speakers come to the region in the 6th and 7th centuries of the Common Era. And they bring their language with them, and that language is what today we call Common Slavic. It was a language that was spoken all over what is today Eastern Europe, very widespread. And gradually it separates into dialects in the same way that Latin separated into dialects and became the Romance languages. Spanish is not Latin. French is not Latin, right? Okay. Modern Macedonian is not ancient Macedonian. Now, in the case of French and Spanish, they are descended from Latin, which itself was Italic. In the case of modern Macedonian, it is descended from Common Slavic in the same way that Bulgarian and Serbian and Croatian and Russian and Belarus. But the thing is, French is no more Italian than Bulgarian is Macedonian. They have common ancestors. That's not the same thing, right? My brother isn't my father. You know what I mean? So that's the analogy we need here. And modern Macedonian, the name Macedonian was taken from the territory in the same way that Bulgarian, Bulgar, was taken from a Turkic-speaking tribe that conquered the Slavic speakers of Bulgaria. Their ethnonym is Turkic, not Slavic. Although they speak a Slavic language, you know, there's a Turkic textbook, Teachers of Turkish. Teachers of Turkish has a sentence in it. It goes like this: Bulgarlar Türktür, bunları İslav yapan dildir, which means the Bulgars are Turks. It is the language which makes them Slav. The point is, names change. French, right? The name of the French language is Germanic. It's not Romance. It's not Latin, right? Well, and they're not Gauls either, you know. So it's like we have to get away from this 19th century nonsense that names are somehow generic. They're not. They shift. They move around.
As a just to follow up on this, and as a linguist, and thank you very much for bringing that up, would you say that Thracian, which would have been close to ancient Macedonian perhaps at the time, has similarities to modern Slavic languages?
Thracian?
Yes, Thracian.
We have no idea. Well, the first answer is no. The second answer is our knowledge of Thracian is extremely limited. We do have a few inscriptions, but they're poorly understood. We can reconstruct, it was definitely Indo-European, but it would have been spoken in the region long before Slavic speakers arrived, and the last Thracian speakers who are attested were the Besi in Bulgaria, and that was at some point around the time that Slavic speakers were arriving. And, you know, the Bulgarians want to say, we're descended from the Thracians. Oh, please, you know, genetically, I don't want to argue with you. That's racist. But linguistically, nothing. Now, Macedonian has some individual words that are of unclear etymology that probably do go back to language that was spoken in the territory before the arrival of Slavic speakers. That's fine. We have all kinds of loan words in English, right? You know, if we have, you know, if we say shillelagh for club, does that mean that we're Irish? No, right? Languages borrow. That's what, I mean, people, vocabulary can move. Grammar does not move. That's the thing that defines a language, is the grammar. And the grammar of Macedonian is Slavic, and the grammar of Bulgarian is Slavic, and the grammar of Thracian is dead. And the grammar of ancient Macedonian is not only dead, we don't even know what it was. Does that help?
Thank you, Victor, for delving into these questions. Now I want to come back to your modern day work with Manu, and well, two questions along this is one, UMD member Peter Zadovsky from Michigan asks, have you served in an advisory capacity to any government officials of Macedonia? And then the second question comes from UMD board member Ordan Andreevsky from Melbourne, Australia. Given that you are a member of MANU, can you please tell us more about its activities, strategies, and plans? And how do academic members like you review the work of MANU to ensure it is fulfilling its mandate?
Okay, so for the first question, I've had the opportunity to meet with a number of the prime ministers of Macedonia in my capacity as members of delegations, or when I worked for UMPROFOR. So when I worked for UMPROFOR, I met with Kiro Gligorov, in part thanks to Vera Stojčevska-Antić, who had good connections. I met him on many other occasions. And then when I was working with the Council on Foreign Relations, Committee for Preventive Action, we met with Branko Crvenkovski. I met with, Georgi Ivanov invited me to the palace once or twice, once at least with a delegation. I've met Stevo Pendarovski once. Oh, and I've met some of the Arben Jaferi and Minduh Thaci I met with when I worked for UMPROFOR. But those were all just meetings in my capacity as working for other international organizations. I've never actually served in any formal advisory capacity to any government, but I've met with a variety of politicians, and there's currently a member of parliament, an independent member, Irena Stefoska, who's a friend of mine. So, you know, we talk. But wait, excuse me. I don't know why that happened. Anyway, so the answer is no, I've never been a formal advisor of any sort, but I've met with various people. I met with Hisni Ramadani, who was an Albanian member of parliament in the old days. And I think I want to tell a joke to lighten the atmosphere. And this really happened, and then I'll go on to the Manu stuff. So during the 2001 insurrection, I worked for the International Crisis Group as a kind of factotum for Morton Abramowitz, who at the time was the president of the International Crisis Group, and he went to Macedonia to do International Crisis Group work in June, try to, you know, achieve whatever. And we met with all kinds of people. And one of the people we met with was Hisni Ramadani, who's this, you know, Stari Volk from Tetovo. I mean, he was a major figure in the communist era. He kept his position in the post-communist era, the Albanian politician, Tetovo, very, you know, adapted person. And we met in his beautiful office in the Parliament building. It was huge. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe 9:30. And he said, you know how it is. You sit around a table and they offer you hospitality. Would you like something to drink? And Mort says, oh yeah, I'll have an orange juice. And I saw his face just fall. And I said, I could do with something stronger. Może nešto poluto. Big smile, you know, rakia for the two of us, orange juice for Morton. He was like, you know, how can you do this at 9 o'clock in the morning? He was like, look, I've been working here all my life, you know. Anyway, that's a joke, but it's true.
Well, in the movie, A Name is a Name, they bring up that Macedonians start the day with rakia and end the day with red wine. So I'm not surprised.
Exactly. No, it was, you know, that was part of doing my field work back in the old days. As far as Manu goes, okay, so Manu is divided into what they call odelenia sections, right? So there's an art section and a literature and linguistics section and an engineering and mathematics section and a chemistry and so on and so forth. And then they also have centers. So there's a center for aerial linguistics, which is where Markovic is the director. There's a center for genetics where they're working on COVID right now. There's a center for international relations. So, and the centers are headed by members of Manu, but they also employ non-members who are presumed to be on their way towards membership, hopefully. There are three categories, well, there are four categories of membership. Full member, corresponding member, which is kind of like associate professor, so you have tenure, but you're not a full. Member, nadvoro dravatan sostav, outside of working status. That's actually I'm not really a full member. I'm a nadvoro drava and sostav member, but I work closely with people in Manu because I have an apartment in Karposh and I go there half the year and hang out and so on. And then there's the honorary member. So Tito was an honorary member, for example. So those are the four. And then, so every year, each odelenia comes up with an annual plan. And they vote and they decide and they discuss. And so what books are they going to support? What projects are they going to have? Who's going to apply for outside grants? Ljupcho Kocarev, who's currently the president, has been a great bringer in of outside grants for computer science, because that's his specialty. He was a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and had a whole career in America and went back to Macedonia to serve the nation. I mean, this guy is a real idealist. He's a little bit younger than I am, maybe 5 years. And, you know, it used to drive him nuts because he would get these outside grants and then the government would stick their fingers in and try and, you know, take overhead in this. Anyway, so Manu is financed through government ministries, but here are people bringing in outside grants and they still have to go through the government. So it's complicated. So each odelenia has its, you know, year-long working plan, books to be published, projects to be, you know, begun, continued, completed, and they meet and they discuss the stuff. And then there are full sessions, and there's a predsedatelstvo, a presidium of Manu, and the presidium of Manu consists of the heads of the divisions with the actual president, who's now Ljupcho Kocarev, and most recently before that it was Taki Fiti, and then before that it was Kambovski, and so on and so forth. And so there's these various layers of bureaucracy, and it's very much like a university. Manu is authorized to grant PhDs, doctorates. And in fact, as a foreign member, I did direct a dissertation. This was a number of years ago, back in the 90s. And it was actually Marian Markovic, who's now a corresponding member. But at the time, the head of, well, it's a long story and I'll make it short. I was in a position to direct the dissertation and I did, and you know, he defended and that was fine. So think of Manu as being like a university, except it's only a research institution. So they don't.
Would it be like a think tank, perhaps? Would
It's
that
like
be
a think tank. It's a
description?
lot like a think tank. It's a lot like a think tank. Thank you, Meto. That's a very good analogy. I mean, you know, there might be some discussion groups and so on, but it's like a think tank. It's exactly that. So
It's a think tank that I guess is primarily funded by government.
yes, yes.
Right.
And during the Gruevski years, it was terrible because the government was trying to make them politicize Manu. And one of the things that has happened since Zaev or Sir Simo came to power, and now this technical government, I don't want to get into that, but the political pressure on Manu has eased up since Dupa Munae has been let out of power. So you know, the whole business about inspecting Manu or, you know, whatever, these calls for supervision of Manu, that's mostly politically motivated, and it's the same kind of people that are currently driving the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. It's not a good thing.
One thing that I, just to add here, regardless, I think is one of the downfalls is education, and investment in education. You know, noticing Manu and the building and the very state that Manu is in. And then going to St. Kirill and Methodi University in Skopje. I remember we were doing a conference in Skopje, and one of the one of our co-sponsors was the philosophical university, and they asked me, let's come over to meet. And I took a taxi, I got dropped off, and I said, are you sure you dropped me off in the right spot? And he goes, yes, this is the university. And I was astonished, Victor, at the state of the university. Regardless on who is in power in Macedonia, unfortunately, the education and the investing in the education has gone weaker and weaker throughout the years. I definitely would not want to be a student at the university, nor would I want to conduct research at Manu in those types of environment, particularly, and I think that's why we're privileged to go to, or have had the privilege of going to, American universities, Canadian or Australian, where it's a totally different ball game. And you know this as somebody who has chaired departments and whatnot.
Sure.
I want to, because we've definitely gone way over the time that I was hoping that we would have, but I think this conversation has been so great and enlightening on numerous fronts, and obviously I think we want to end on some positive notes, and one is, you know, Magdalena Krstanovsky from Florida asks, what's the best course of action for Macedonians to unite in protection of the Macedonian language, culture, history? But then what advice would you give to organizations like UMD and other diaspora organizations and the people that are participating on the Zoom call and following on Facebook? What should they be doing to help, I guess, cause the Macedonian global cause?
Yeah, Meto, you made a very good point that education has been underfunded in Macedonia all along, or for a long time anyway. Certainly the previous, you know, well, I won't go into details. So what I would say is that diaspora, two things. One, of course, is the obvious function of diaspora organizations, lobbying in the home country, in the diaspora country, that is to say, for, you know, the protection of Macedonia. The other, though, would be to spend what donations you have on things like education instead of stupid monuments. Sorry, but, you know, you folks in the diaspora, you've got money, you can be spending it on scholarships, you can be spending it on, you know, the heritage trips that sometimes are funded, bringing young people to Macedonia to you know, that kind of stuff. They didn't have stuff like that when I was a kid. I wish they had, you know.
Well,
So,
go ahead, please.
no, I was just going to say, you know, I'm Jewish, and now they have these heritage trips, you know, sending young people to Israel. In my day, they didn't have anything like that, you know, and now I'm too old. They don't care what I do, you know. So you can do that. You can fund young people to go to Macedonia. You can fund education in Macedonia, especially Honorary Metodija, which still is the best university. All of the, you know, the others are, but no, you can, you've got, you and the diaspora are successful. The other thing you could do if you wanted, Christina Kramer got the Macedonian diaspora to fund her teaching of Macedonian in Toronto for decades, right? Now she's retired. So you need to find somebody who's in a position to bring that forward, and then you can support the teaching of Macedonian at a university in a place where there's a large diaspora community, where there's kids like students of Christina who will come and take the language. I mean, Toronto has the largest diaspora community in Canada and maybe even in North America. So, you know, but you know, fund education, fund trips for young people. Those are, and the lobbying, those are my suggestions.
Well, thank you, Victor. I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, we at UMD, definitely education is one of our most important programs. That is our co-sponsor of this, obviously, this event, UMD and Generation M, which is our Young Leaders program, where we have invested in over 250 youth to assist in their leadership development. We also have given close to 100,000 in BTOF scholarships to students from the diaspora as well as from Macedonia studying abroad. And then we also have Birthright Macedonia, which I mean was founded by our advisory council member, Peter Dallas, but taking up really, I mean, meshing Birthright Israel and Birthright Armenia together. And recently, but unfortunately due to COVID, we had to postpone both Birthright, but also we formed a partnership with Macedonia Tours, which is based in Australia, to bring Macedonians and friends of Macedonia to visit, to learn about food, culture, history, and all that, which, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges of Macedonians is brain drain, and we are now working on that and kind of brain gain. But you decided to spend half of the year in Macedonia. So tell us why, and give us you know, a few adjectives that you would describe Macedonia.
Okay, so first of all, let me give you one more idea, and then I'll go to the others. A scholarship fund for bright people in Macedonia to study abroad with the condition that they have to go back, kind of a Fulbright sort of a thing. That's another thought. Okay, now how to describe Macedonia. So Goran Stefanovski, Bog da go prosti, he died young, but he was a great playwright. And once he took me out to dinner and he said to me, so Victor, what are the 3 words you would use to describe Macedonia? And I said, I'll give you 2. Kefli, kef and yavashluk. Kef and yavashluk. You know, pleasure on the one hand and, well, take it easy, mañana, slowness on the other. This is Macedonia, right? On the one hand, people know how to enjoy themselves. On the other hand, when you go to get your stipend from the bank, when you're on a Fulbright, they say, doidi sabaile, come again tomorrow. Maybe it'll be in, you know. So, and the thing is, Goran then mounted a sitcom, Macedonian sitcom, in which he declared that the 2 themes of the sitcom were going to be kef and yavashluk. Got the idea from me. So, why spend half the year in Macedonia? Well, you know, for one thing, all the languages. I can walk out of my apartment, I can hear Macedonian, I can hear Albanian, I can hear Turkish, I can hear Romani, I can hear Aromanian. I'm in fieldwork heaven, you know, and I have lots of good friends, you know, and Narakia is great, and the Ivar is wonderful, and the Banitsa is fantastic, and you know, I have to be careful because I always gain 20 pounds when I go, but never mind. And the other thing that I like is, I often go in summertime and open the windows at night, and all day long, there's people out in the court. I'm in Karpoš, in a building with a kind of a courtyard. There's a bunch of high rises around it. These are Ruski zgradi from right after the earthquake. And there's always people. There's parents with little kids, and there's old people playing chess, and then the young people will congregate at lunchtime during school, or and at night, and it's not dangerous. It's the young people wouldn't dare get drunk because they know they're being watched from all the windows around them, right? And if they get too noisy, somebody will yell out, to quiet down, people have to work tomorrow. And it's like my old neighborhood here in Hyde Park in Chicago when I was a little boy. It's like the 50s in Chicago, when we all played outside and everybody's door was open and you just ran up and down and there was always somebody home. Every so often, if mommy had to go shopping or do something where she couldn't take you, she found a neighbor to make sure you were okay. And it's a way of life that we don't have anymore in Chicago, at least not in this part of Chicago. And they still have it in Karpoš, and it just, yeah, I love it.
Well, thank you, Victor, for sharing that, and thank you very much for giving back to Macedonian economy with living there half of the year. And I think that's the diaspora and the friends of Macedonia amount to probably about 18 to 20% of the economy of GDP, right? In remittances, tourism, investments, and whatnot. With that, Victor, we are going to conclude. If I may ask you just to stop screen share really quick. And for our audience, I just want to inform them that we actually are going to continue this conversation on June 22nd on a different note. We're actually going to have Christina Kramer, who is going to speak on keeping Macedonian language alive in the diaspora, because I think that's a very important, those heritage speakers, symbolic heritage speakers, second, third, fourth generation. And then on June 29th, my colleague Christina Dimitrievski is going to moderate a discussion with Susan Sloan, who's the author of A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. And those of you that want to practice your Macedonian language skills, we're going to actually have a presentation with a scholar from Macedonia, or a lover of Macedonian history, Gordana Janakievski, who is going to speak on how much do we actually know about Macedonia and the facts and tips about the geography, the cultural monuments, and the history overall, featuring Tony Naumovsky Rotino, the actor that has been in Madam Secretary, and numerous others. So, Victor, thank you so much for giving us this thorough, having this thorough conversation on many topics. Thank you for accommodating so many diverse questions. We probably went off topic a few times, but that's what happens when two people are passionate, people in the audience are passionate about the topic. And so thank you very much to you and to all of our members on Zoom and on Facebook. Thank you, Victor.
Da ste mi živi i zdravi.
Isto i vi, Viktor, vi blagodaram i se slušame, se gledame povtorno. Prijatno da si. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye.